This is going to be another unscripted video on the new Mario Kart 8 DLC. Generally the same deal as last time. I don't really care about the characters, so instead I'll be focusing pretty much on the tracks. Something to mention about the characters quickly though, is that I definitely like them a lot more than the last batch of DLC we got. Being able to pick between the male and female villager is a pretty cool idea, and Isabelle is a pretty neat character as well. And while Dry Bowser is still a far cry from an actual cool character like Dry Bones, it still feels like a more tangible distinction than Tanuki Mario and Cat Peach were from their original counterparts. With all that said, there is something else to talk about with this new DLC, and it's a pretty major game changer. 200cc. 200cc blows the previous cap of 150 away in terms of speed, and it definitely changes the game up a lot. But while it's hard for me to make any conclusive judgment on it just yet, considering I haven't played much of it, I can say that right now I don't really like it that much at all, to be honest. Mario Kart's big selling point as a racing game is the sense of control it gives you, and the sense of flow when you can successfully drift around each and every corner. In 200cc you have to exercise quite a bit more caution, but it's often not conducive to the way the track design actually wants you to play it. In some cases, 200cc will ask you to back out of a drift halfway through instead of getting even a slight boost from it. And that's okay, that adds another tactical dilemma to the proceedings. But the PR of Nintendo has told you that you're going to have to brake a lot if you want to successfully pull off 200cc, which is not ideal. Once you start slowing down and you lose all your momentum, you begin to notice how stiff the turning can be, and it's very hard to build it back up, particularly with all the items flying around. It definitely works more on some tracks than others, and we'll be getting to that. And in general, it does have its moments, but there are also some moments of complete oddity. It seems like the jumping physics have completely changed in 200cc, because you're able to get a lot more air off of ramps even if you're not doing a flourish, which somehow makes the Excite Bike level tolerable. And the increased speed and jump distance means that some levels are really seen straining. For example, the water park level has some pylons that you can just pass through. And while it's good to see in addition to the core gameplay that adequately changes things up, it also just goes to show how utterly superfluous and pointless mirror mode is. So overall, I'm glad that there's at least something being done to attempt to shake up the foundations of a fairly old game at this point, particularly in a manner as meaningful as a speed increase, but I'm also glad it's not the standard, which I believe on online is 100cc. Now, about those tracks. The first track of the pack is Baby Park, and boy oh boy did I both anticipate and dread this one coming. I've made it no secret that I absolutely hate this track, because in terms of design it is the most simplest and asinine thing you can imagine. 2 hairpins, and that's all. In this version they added a bit of grass around the hairpin to make sure you don't go too inside of the turn, but I believe that is all in terms of most basic track design. No, the selling point for Baby Park is the 7 lap limit and the frequency of the power-ups you can obtain, meaning that each race is meant to be super frantic and hectic and play really well to the series' strengths. However, honestly, I don't think it's enough to distract from what is a very simple and banal course. Plus, playing it on 200cc, consistently turning in one direction with the velocity that you're travelling at, makes it an almost nauseating experience for me. And as someone who can play through Mirror's Edge multiple times without breaking a sweat, that should say something. It has its appeal, I'm sure, and I'll admit it's pretty cool to just do a long session of consecutive drifts along one direction on a lower speed, but honestly the simplicity is just too much, and there's not enough to distract from it, in my opinion. Cheeseland apparently debuted in Super Circuit, but honestly, I just get the impression it's the rehash of Bone Dry Dunes from Mario Kart 8's base game. Like, not even just in terms of aesthetic, it also feels very similar to Drive Around, and that's why I don't think it's a particularly good track overall. Bone Dry Dunes was probably among the lesser of the tracks in the base game, and while this isn't terrible either, it doesn't do enough to distract from its pseudo-predecessor. Even just rewatching this, all the turns are very simple. There's only one notable shortcut alongside a ramp. I mean, I know you're going to hear this in post, but I'm just rewatching the footage here and I'm utterly bored just watching this particular track. Like, this has to be one of the most boring tracks I've raced on in quite some time. Just not exciting at all, like, really. Like, Nothing to say about it. I was completely stupid and I thought Wild Woods was also based on Animal Crossing in some form. It's not. It's completely original and it's pretty good. The main selling point here is that it has quite a few elevation changes. You're going to be using a lot of ramps and using a lot of anti-gravity, and it actually has quite a lot of flow to it. It feels very dynamic. It feels like it's changing quite a bit. The only real problem I have is that one lap of this is too short and you're going to be finishing the race quite quickly. But otherwise, I've definitely liked racing on this track the few times I've played this DLC through, and I hope it comes up in the series again, actually, with a few more expansions. Maybe not super great, but definitely pretty good. I definitely enjoy it. Final race of the first cup is a track that is actually based on Animal Crossing. In fact, it comes in 4 seasonal varieties, which come at complete random. They're not based on the system clock as you might expect. Overall, this track is pretty good. Each season actually changes things up slightly enough, but it never completely changes the track, which I actually think is quite a very good balance. Overall, the track has quite a bit of variety to it, but is mostly about those big drifts with a few obstacles sprinkled in between. Definitely a good pedigree for the Mario Kart series, considering Royal Raceway is probably one of the better tracks in the base game, which this one seems to most resemble. Moreover, I like how much the Animal Crossing aesthetic seems to work with this game. I've mentioned how much the 2 new Animal Crossing characters work as characters, but this track looks pretty good to race on in terms of the rest of the series as well. Mostly, I'm just impressed by how much each seasonal variation changes things up while still keeping the core of the track intact. That's actually very, very hard to do, but a run around the beach is different in every variety, and that's pretty cool. Definitely like this track, definitely a highlight of this pack. Koopa City is easily my favourite of this pack, simply because it has the most fluidity to it. You can drift around pretty much every turn, and if you can pull it off perfectly, you can clear the track with a lot of speed, and it feels really, really satisfying. It's really hard, but if you nail it, you feel so great pulling it off. It's probably the track that works best for 200cc, because you have to learn which turns to fully drift around and which ones to back out of a drift partway through. Slowing down and turning generally doesn't work, but backing out of a drift might cost you some speed, but that little bump you get at the beginning in terms of handling will change everything. It makes 200cc feel like a true addition to the game. I could play this level over and over, honestly. Absolutely one of the best in the pack. Arguably one of the best in the game so far. Ribbon Road is a weird track, and I don't just mean in terms of its aesthetic. Part of this track is really, really good. Part of this track kind of blows. When you're on the sort of ground, it's really good, because you get a few wide open turns, but also a few chicanes, and it's a different sort of experience each time, depending on what speed you're at. But once you hit the mid-air highway, things get really bumpy. It's actually really hard to navigate. That section of track alone is easily the hardest piece of this DLC, and I'm not sure it feels truly fair. It's just too easy to fall off, and it's truly hard to navigate. I like the music though, because it sounds like a surf rock track as written by Shoji Meguro. But yeah, I don't know, the track design is just a bit too frustrating for me. Very hard to get that blue pattern down. Super Bell Speedway, probably second best of this pack, because it takes the most advantage of every feature in the game thus far, save for maybe paragliding. The multi-level stage layout where you can race along the subway tracks or alongside some scaffoldings or some sidewalks is a really cool idea that's done absolutely brilliantly. It makes the track feel really alive, and the final turn, with another shortcut covered up by some grass, feels like one of the better ones of its type, and considering there are a lot in Mario Kart so far, that should say a lot. Simply feels the most organic and the one that makes the most sense. Again, if you can pull it off, it feels really good. I definitely like this track a lot because you feel like you can interact with it quite a bit. Like, the multi-stage layout definitely adds a lot to proceedings. If it was just one track instead of the 3 or so, it would be quite a mediocre track, but the multi-track layout definitely elevates it to something quite a bit more. Lovely. Big Blue is, of course, another F-Zero track. I think I like Mute City more, honestly. This one might be sleeker and faster, but it's also quite a bit tougher, and it's quite unforgiving. Even though there are sort of 3 distinct sections with only 1 lap, sort of like Mount Wario or Rainbow Road, no section is truly unique enough to really give it that standout feel, and I'm not sure why it couldn't have been made a closed circuit, considering it's not as long as either of those 2 tracks. And it also doesn't make sense to not have a closed circuit when you're basing a track off of F-Zero, which only had one lap circuits in its story mode in GX, as far as I know. Like, I don't know how the developers expect people to hear all of the Dream Theater circa 1991 rendition of this song when, like, a full run of this course will take you about a minute. Honestly, especially on 200cc, it's just too frustrating. You're just gonna end up flying off the track a lot of the time, and there's really not a lot of space to turn and drift with. I just find it a bit more trouble than it's worth, really. Damn, I tiered these tracks way differently earlier when I'd posted about them on Twitter, but if I were to tier them from best to worst now, it would be Cooper City, Super Bell's Subway, Wild Woods, Animal Crossing, Big Blue, Ribbon Road, Cheeseland, and Baby Park. Overall, I find it a measure less than the DLC that came out 6 months ago, but considering how much money I put into Rock Band DLC, this is still pretty good value for money. 16 Australian dollars is around $1 a track for both packs, which I can easily recommend even if I only thought one track here was super great. For reference, I'd raced each track in single player on 200cc, and I'd raced them all a number of times online at 100. And I think it's telling that when I went online I was immediately having a better time. Also, sorry if this video is a bit waffly and unfocused or if my voice sounds off. This has just been an impossible week. Here's to even more Mario Kart DLC, maybe, please?